Berry, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
So listen, I always feel, I never used to timestamp, but feel I should because of the world that we're now living in. Kind of, we're February 2021.
Yeah.
It's a question I've been meaning to ask you literally for the last year, is that you've always talked about managing risk, and you've talked about dealing with uncertainty and how you make decisions under these circumstances. And now maybe as a world, we are having to do this, whether personally or whether professionally. Do you think we are any better equipped at doing this now than we were previously? Do you think we are, because we're in the middle of the pandemic and our stress levels, all of us, kind of are up here, that we're almost less equipped to be able to make decisions kind of objectively?
I think that's definitely a thing, in the sense of, like, at a physiological level, people just have more adrenaline coursing through them. And we know what adrenaline does. You know, it takes sugars and blood away from the brain, away from the prefrontal cortex. Whatever the most sophisticated mechanisms we have for making decisions are the first things to go. So, you know, when you're in times of extreme stress, you literally get sensory close down. But if we have adrenaline, if we are stressed, if we are unhappy generally, then our decision-making faculties fail. They get worse, it becomes more primitive. It you know, gradually retreats to the limbic brain and fight and flight. So I think that's true. But I don't think necessarily, as you say, in February 2021, we're experiencing the same adrenaline that we were in the 1st of April 2020, when we, you know, were fighting for survival in some cases, particularly in business case. And I think that, but I have this passionate belief that my job changed in October 2008. Right, because that was when people realized that the money in their current account wasn't 100% safe, and that they had to adapt to uncertainty, like, properly, fundamentally. And let me put that in context. Since 2003, properly since 2004, I've been going into a series of rooms of businesses and making them laugh, hopefully, but being dismissed by a lot of people as a bit of an oddity. Do you know what I mean? Like, why have we got this poker player here? But definitely, why are we talking about uncertainty? Like, you know, we make widgets. We don't. We're not bankers. And so October 2008 was the first time that people had to properly contemplate that this thing called uncertainty, this tidal wave, might overcome them. Now, I honestly believe, and this is part of a much bigger conversation, that part of the reason for that, you know, talk about PLO oil shocks, talk about even World War II, all you want, that capitalism as we understand it has had a very lucky window. I mean, like, literally geologically. I mean in terms of an absence of, you know, tsunamis and supervolcanoes and the kind of things which literally throw risk metrics out of whack. Talk to anyone in insurance, they'll say, yeah, you know, there's an event which can happen, which means all bets are off. You know, all of our risk calculations take place on a terrain where, broadly speaking, business is going to carry on tomorrow. And maybe, you know, the coronavirus pandemic is the first thing in that 100 years, literally the 100 years of capitalism, the 100 years since 1918, where we've had to contemplate that business won't carry on. Business won't carry on tomorrow like it did yesterday. And I think that, like 2008, in fact, more so than 2008, because I think it's been more profound, that has adjusted people's risk matrices and calculations to embrace uncertainty more readily. And my whole body of work is based on the idea that the more people do that, the better decision makers they'll be.
Okay, so I suppose my follow-up, how do we recognize that we are embracing it better?
Okay, well, the first thing is, so the first step of that, again, I'm reverting to my material, if you like, here, but this is only my material because it's true, is you stop trying to predict the future in the way that we did, right? Now, we've done that already in business. You see that shift. You know, we're just about old enough to remember when the companies that employed our fathers had 25-year business plans. That's hilarious now, isn't it? Yeah. If you had a 5-year business plan 15 years ago, you know, you had a quarter-to-quarter business plan. A lot of huge corporations in America would have had that in the last 10 years. But it's more fundamental than that. So in my core presentation, I talk about the work of Philip Tetlock. He's become a celebrity in the time that I've been talking about him, 10 years. And Tetlock is the guy who coined the term super forecasters, which draws a distinction between people who make pretty good forecasts about the future, not perfect, because no one's perfect, and people who make really bad forecasts about the future. Calls these people foxes and these people hedgehogs. Foxes because they're wily and they know lots of things. Hedgehogs because they know one big thing. And hedgehogs are the kind of people who are ironically good pundits on Fox News, because they say what the future is going to be. You know, they say who's going to be the next president. They say he's going to be impeached or not impeached. They make certainty pronouncements based on their years of experience and they're experts in the subject. And these people don't do that. Now that can be frustrating because you as a human being very often want certainty and you go, just tell me what's going to happen. But actually the people that make better A, forecasts and then B, decisions based on those forecasts think probabilistically. And that's why poker is a great metaphor for this, because it doesn't matter if you're playing your first hand of poker ever or your world championship or your world champion, you do not know what the future holds. And if you're world champion, you know that you don't know what the future holds. You know that you don't know whether a heart is going to come on the river. And so you have to think probabilistically and you have to make your decisions probabilistically. And that, to take you to the next stage of this, but it's still answering your question, means that the leadership of the next century embraces uncertainty by moving out of the middle of the bell curve. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. If you break Tetlock's work down, what he's saying is that what these hedgehogs are basically predicting, unless they want to be contrarians, right? The way to be a successful hedgehog is you predict the thing that's most likely to happen. Okay, because obviously that's the thing that's most likely to happen. That's like going to a horse racing and betting on the favourite. The favourite is going to win most of the time. It's the favourite. The sum total of knowledge of everyone at the racetrack says that it's most likely it's the best horse, right? Or it's in the best form at this point. But what Tetlock's work says is that the reason these people aren't as successful as you would have thought they would be is because the favourite doesn't win all the time, and it doesn't win even as often as you think it's going to. Because the bell curve, right, which might look like that, is actually flattened. Okay, so we've been talking about fat tails for a few years since the Black Swan, 2007. And the fat tails are these extreme events, which if the thing that's most likely to succeed is less likely, those events probabilistically have to happen somewhere. So they happen out here, right? So leadership historically has been focused here in the middle of the bell curve on what's most likely to happen. Let's put our investment in this. And although it's Pareto stuff, it's, 80% of your time is still going to be spent thinking there. Actually, real leadership needs to be thinking more out here more often. And for the last 15 years, what I've spent my time talking about is investing in opportunities. And opportunities are almost by definition the things which aren't definitely going to succeed, but which, if they succeed, are going to yield these huge returns. So depending on which way.
So let me tie that, go back to something you said right at the beginning and kind of tie that into the poker, which is around fatigue. We've been living it for so long, kind of in the pandemic, and now we're fatigued of that. Kind of the adrenaline's gone because we've been in the middle of it. And I kind of, in preparation for this, I was thinking of the analogy of the poker table. You're sitting there for how many hours? You're sitting there, and you start losing kind of I can't think of the right word, but kind of your decision making isn't as kind of focused because you are fatigued. So when we are spotting opportunities and flattening the curve and looking at the outliers or whatever you want to call them, what advice do you have for me or kind of for anyone watching this in terms of actually identifying whether or not I'm making a good decision or whether I'm making a decision because I'm tired of being in that place of high adrenaline?
So I think the first thing is that good decision making is going to be tiring, right? That's a reality. And what you're saying is, I'm tired, I'm exhausted of this, uncertainty and volatility and chaos. And so what happens then again is that as our blood and glucose retreat into more primitive decision-making areas, and we make more tired decisions, which are, look, what's most likely to happen here? Let's just account for that, right? And this kind of decision-making, right, this peripheral, this, fat tails, this extreme event decision-making is really tiring because you have to conceptualize more of what might happen. So that literally uses creativity, okay? So one of the very simple questions that I ask in my sessions these days is say to people, what do you think the next, whatever, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years is going to entail? And then you say, what could the next 6 years entail? So not what will it, but what could it, right? Now suddenly you're using a completely different part of your brain because you're having to come up with creative ideas, which is what opportunities are, and great risk management. And I always think it's really fascinating that we think of these two things as very different. Like, this is optimists, seeing possibilities, and this is doer pessimists, seeing the tidal wave. Well, actually, it's exactly the same part of the brain. This is conceiving and conceptualizing things that could happen, and investing in a basket of some of them so that you get a return when one of them does. And this is conceiving and conceptualize bad things which could happen. Like pandemics. And then the risk management part of it comes is you don't get a return when they happen, you just save money when they happen because you've invested in the mitigating strategy that ensure against them. But it's exhausting, it's tiring. You have to have that conversation of what could, and then you have to go, you can go a step further, which is like not just what, well, the second stage actually, is what might happen. That's where your brain starts thinking about things which have happened before, but aren't necessarily the most likely thing. And then the final stage is what could happen, which is where you start thinking about things which haven't happened before and trying to identify, the phrase black swans, the things which weren't on our agenda at all, but which, if they happen over here, we need a part of them, cryptocurrency, whatever. And if they happen over here, we need to be ready for them in some way. And the whole cutting edge of writing on this right now is you can never be ready for everything, but you can have certain insulating strategies, like have some money, for example, have some very basic, drills, so people know where they should be in the event of a dream event, and where they're going to collect and gather and how they're going to communicate, that kind of thing. So I think the answer is the reason why people want certainty and the reason why the middle of the bell curve is because it's easier, and this is difficult, but what Corona shows is it's necessary.
So can I ask you one final question then? And I think and it's something many years ago, we were lucky enough that you sat down with us and played some poker with us, and we got to experience your wisdom of poker. And you basically went around the table and you told us all what type of poker player we were, what type of risk taker we were.
I can't remember doing that, right? Okay, that's a dangerous thing for me to do, but
no, it was a fun evening. But I think one of the things that we looking back and up to it, which struck me now, is that if we are all within us, we have our profile of the type of person we are. And we're in these times, whatever. Can people change their risk profile, and can you adapt yourself and be someone you're not, or do you have to embrace who you are and work within those confines?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think the answer is there needs to be more writing and working on that, because everything that I'm saying here is it's quite new. Again, that's why Corona is really good, because it's inculcating some new and cutting edge thinking about the way that we think about the future and make decisions. Okay, this is not well-worn stuff. I think the first thing to say about that is one of the conversations that I have. So I did a presentation once for Sam Allardyce when he was at Blackburn, and I at that point in my career was using Frank Dick's nomenclature, because I've done some work with Frank Dick, speaker, I'm sure you will know. It was Daley Thompson's coach and a great motivational speaker. We talked about mountain people and valley people, right? And I would talk about mountain people, I talk about this graph, and at the top of the mountain were the risk takers, and they're basically the people who think probabilistically about opportunity, and mainly in a positive sense, and valley people who just didn't make mistakes and were solid and all the rest of it. And Sam Allardyce goes, Caspar, I need those valley people in my team, I call them defenders. Right, and he's absolutely right. A great team has both kinds of people in it, and Abdusai's work at the moment on diversity shows that you want different kinds of ideas and different kinds of people. And in many ways, my life as a trainer in the first iteration of my speaking life for a company called the Mind Gym, it just made me aware that I thought the biggest challenge of business, like when you whittle it down, was that a great team needed different kinds of people, but at the same time they have to work and communicate together, and that's it. That's the challenge. How do you do that? So the first thing is square pegs in square holes. Okay, and the second thing is, I'm going to borrow from a different thinker and writer now. who many of us will know as Edward de Bono, and the thinking hats. What's the simplest way to think in a different way? Just to be a different person, right? Just say, how would Nelson Mandela think about this? Do you know what I mean? How would Bill Gates think about this? And the human brain is an amazingly plastic thing. You won't become a completely different person in that moment, but you will start to force yourself to think about something from a completely different perspective. Wear a black hat, be really dour and pessimistic, list all the things that can go wrong with something. Wear a yellow hat, you know, think about all the opportunities in your industry in the next 5 years. It's possible, but don't do it too much at the expense of allowing people to think quite naturally and bringing those conversations together.
Brilliant. Caspar, as always, pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. And look forward to catching up soon.
Great.